Okay, think about this for a second. When you picture, wine country, maybe Tuscany comes to mind, or those classic vineyards in Bordeaux,
Sure, the usual suspects, rolling hills, maybe a chateau.
right? But what if I told you the very first time someone deliberately, crushed grapes, let them ferment, and called it wine? What if that happened thousands and thousands of years ago, not in Europe, but right here, in the region we're talking about today?
It does make you pause, doesn't it? It completely flips the script on where wine really began. Europe definitely ran with it later, refined it, spread it, but the deepest, oldest roots, they're somewhere else entirely.
Exactly. And that ancient starting point, that's where we're kicking off this deep dive. We're exploring the incredible, really ancient, and now surprisingly vibrant world of wine in the Levant.
hmm This historic area, covering modern-day Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, it holds so many secrets about how wine growing even started, secrets that shaped everything that came after, and interestingly are having this kind of rebirth right now.
Yeah, we managed to get hold of some really fascinating source material. It gives this amazing comprehensive look at the region's whole wine journey through all that time.
So our mission today really is to unpack not just why the Levant is so historically important for wine, which it absolutely is, but also to get why it's becoming a genuinely exciting, promising wine region again today.
Okay, I'm ready. I'll guide us through some of the highlights, pull out the facts and stories that really jumped out at me from the sources.
And I'll try to connect those dots, link the history to what's happening now, add some context, and explore why this whole story actually matters in the wine world today. Let's get into it.
Right, let's start right at the beginning. Because the sources, they make a really strong case for the Levant specifically, that Fertile Crescent area it overlaps with, as basically the birthplace of viticulture. We're talking
Oh, but yeah,
over 6,000 years ago.
Yeah, deep into the Neolithic period. That's where the evidence suggests the wild grapevine, Vitis vinifera, was first domesticated. And that's the key step, right? Not just finding wild grapes, but actively cultivating them. That's the road to actual wine production.
And the archaeology they mentioned just brings it to life.
Yeah.
You've got sites like Haji Fruz Tepe, part of that whole ancient cultural zone, where they found fossilized grape seeds, evidence of actual cultivation way back then.
And not just seeds, remnants of basic presses too. So they were processing the grapes. And those ancient clay pots, amphorae,
hmm
essentially the first wine jars for storing and maybe even trading it.
It really shows it wasn't just, fruit juice going off by accident.
Exactly. It suggests real intention. Early technology, even if it was simple. They were trying to make wine and keep it.
And pretty quickly it became way more than just a drink. The sources really stress the cultural side, the religious importance. I mean, you think of the Bible, Noah planting a vineyard right after the flood. It shows wine was just woven into the fabric of those early societies.
Absolutely central. Part of rituals, community feasts, definitely trade. It was valuable stuff, a real cultural marker.
And that importance just carried on through the big ancient civilizations that rose and fell there. The sources really highlight the Phoenicians.
Ah, the Phoenicians, they were incredible. They were basically the ancient world's wine ambassadors, these amazing sailors setting up trade routes all over the Mediterranean.
They weren't just selling trinkets then.
No, no, they were actively spreading the whole package. The vines themselves, the know-how of growing them, the techniques for making wine.
So they took this knowledge from the Levant out to places we now think of as classic wine regions.
Precisely. Greece, Italy, North Africa, Spain. They were planting the seeds, literally, for Europe's future wine scene, all based on the knowledge from back here in the Levant.
Wow. Then the Romans arrive, and production ramps up even more. The sources show the Levant became a really key supplier for the Roman Empire.
Yeah, under Rome, you see more organization, bigger scale. Winemaking wasn't just surviving, it was a proper industry, feeding the huge demand across the empire.
And it wasn't only the Romans.
Hmm.
The sources mention other big players, like the ancient Egyptians, the Persians. They valued wines from this area too. It was clearly a major crossroads for wine culture.
Which makes its survival even more impressive.
Yeah.
Because, the super long tradition hit a major bump in the road with the rise of Islamic rule and the prohibitions on alcohol.
Right, that must have drastically cut back large-scale wine production.
Oh, definitely. It led to a big decline in many places. But this is where the story gets really interesting. How did it survive at all for centuries when the main culture discouraged or forbade it? The sources are pretty clear. It comes down to the minority communities.
Like the Maronite Christians in Lebanon, for instance. The material points to them continuing to make wine mainly for religious use like the Eucharist, right?
Yeah.
And just for their own communities.
Their role was absolutely vital. By keeping those traditions alive, even on a smaller scale, they preserved not just the practice, but also the local grape varieties, the old ways of making wine. They were the custodians, keeping that flame flickering when it could easily have gone out. That religious connection wasn't just symbolic, it was the lifeline.
And because they held on to that lifeline, we can now talk about what the sources call this, modern Renaissance, a real comeback in Levant wine, especially in the late 20th and now 21st century.
Yeah, after centuries where it was mostly small scale, often just for local use, there's been this pretty rapid, significant resurgence. It's a genuinely exciting time over there for wine.
So what's behind this comeback? The sources point to a few key things. One is a new generation of producers, really visionary people.
Right, and many of them went abroad, got trained internationally, soaked up global techniques, but then they came back. And crucially, they're applying that knowledge with real respect for their own place. The unique terroir, those native grapes. It's a blend of global smarts and local soul.
There's also been a lot more investment in modern kit, yeah.
Huge investment, proper modern cellars, technology in the vineyards for precision growing. That tech upgrade lets them control things much more finely, from grape to bottle. It lifts the quality right across the board.
And a really big focus on rediscovering and celebrating those native grapes, the autochthonous ones we mentioned.
Yes, and that's so important for identity. These are the grapes that evolved there, perfectly suited to the local conditions over thousands of years. Bringing them back into the spotlight gives the region something truly unique to offer the world.
And underpinning all this seems to be just an intense drive for quality. They want to compete on the world stage.
It's not just about making more wine, it's about making great wine. Wine that can stand up next to bottles from anywhere.
Then the last piece mentioned is wine tourism, enotourism. That's growing too.
Definitely. Opening wineries, offering tastings, vineyard tours. It's a brilliant way to showcase what they're doing. It brings people in, connects them to the place, the history. Good for the image, good for the local economy too.
Now, to really understand the wines themselves, we have to talk terroir. The sources dive into that whole combination of climate, soil, the land itself.
And the key takeaway here, what's really fascinating, is that the Levant isn't just one single terroir. It's incredibly diverse. A mosaic, really. And that variation within a pretty compact area, that's actually its strength. It allows for a huge range of wine styles, each with its own distinct personality.
You might think Levant, you think hot and sunny, right? But the climate story is way more complex.
It really is. Sure, along the coast, you get that typical Mediterranean thing, hot, dry summers, mild, wet winters. Sea breezes help cool things down a bit.
But then you go inland.
And it gets more continental. Bigger swings, hotter summers, colder winters, sometimes properly cold, even snow.
And altitude plays a massive role. Lots of mountains.
Hugely important. Higher up means cooler temperatures overall. You get snow in winter. And you get that big diurnal range, the difference between daytime heat and nighttime cold.
That day-night temperature swing seems key, according to the sources. It slows down the ripening.
Exactly. In warm climates, that slow, steady ripening is gold. Grapes get fully ripe in terms of flavor and tannins, but crucially, they hang on to their acidity because of those cool nights. And that acidity is vital for freshness, for balance, especially if you want the wine to age well.
And the ground underneath? The soils are just as varied.
Totally. You find limestone soils common in parts of Lebanon, Israel. Great drainage, which is good in dry spots, and often linked to wines with elegance, maybe a bit of minerality.
Then there's clay. Holds onto water more.
Right. Retains water and nutrients, can be really helpful in dry spells, maybe adds a bit of body, structure to the wine.
Some volcanic soils, like in the Golan Heights.
Yeah, basalt soils there, rich in iron, other minerals. The sources suggest this can give the wines a really distinctive mineral edge, maybe some extra structural complexity.
They also mention sandy soils, making lighter, more aromatic wines, stony soils, helping drainage, fertile alluvial soils down in the valleys. It's a real mix.
Absolutely. Each type brings something different to the party.
And the shape of the land itself, topography adds yet another layer.
Fundamentally shapes the microclimates. Mountains are obvious. Higher up means cooler, plus that diurnal range we talked about.
And which way a slope faces matters too.
Big time. Its aspect affects how much sun it gets, how warm it gets. Good winemakers choose their sites very carefully based on this. Think about the Lebanon mountains, Mount Hermon. That topography is crucial.
Valleys, like the Bekaa in Lebanon or the Jordan Valley, often have richer soils, maybe better water access.
Often alluvial soils, yeah.
Yeah.
Historically prime spots for farming, including vines.
And then the flatter plains, coastal or inland,
Mm.
probably warmer, more consistent climate.
Generally, yes. More uniform
So
conditions.
the main point here is it's not one thing. It's this complex dance between climate, soil, altitude aspect,
Mhm.
creating this patchwork quilt of different little environments.
Exactly, these distinct microclimates.
Yeah.
And figuring out which grape works best in which little pocket. That's the art. That's how producers are getting such quality and expressing the uniqueness of the Levant.
Let's talk about those grapes then. The sources describe this really interesting blend. You've got the ancient native varieties and then the international stars that have moved in.
The native ones, the autocolonous grapes, they're particularly exciting. These are the region's genetic heritage adapted over millennia. They hold the key to wines that taste like nowhere else.
Lebanon's got a couple of key white ones mentioned, Obeida and Merwa.
Yeah, Obeida can apparently make quite complex whites, sometimes with minerality, honey, spice notes. Merwa is described as maybe a bit more rustic, but giving body and acidity. Interesting, too, that Acertico, the Greek grape, seems to be doing well there.
Palestine has Baladi, a red grape, fruity, rustic potential, and whites like Hamdani and Jandali still being figured out.
Syria, obviously facing challenges, but there are efforts to rediscover their local varieties. Israel's doing active research to find and bring back ancient grapes, ones that might have been lost. Jordan's looking into its local heritage, too.
And what do these native grapes generally bring to the table? What are their characteristics?
Well, based on the sources, they're often naturally tough, suited to dry conditions, diverse soils, good drought resistance. Wine-wise, you get everything from mineral whites to fruity, spicy, sometimes earthy reds. They really taste of the place they grew up in.
But it's definitely not just about the ancient ones. International grapes are a massive part of the scene now.
Oh, absolutely. Grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Merlot, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Viognier,
Yeah.
mostly brought in during the 19th and 20th centuries, they've adapted really well and often blend beautifully with the native varieties.
How do these familiar grapes taste when grown in the Levant compared to, say, France or California?
Well, the combination of that warm sun, the altitude in many places, the varied soils, it tends to lead to really full ripeness. Concentrated fruit flavors. Often the tannins in the reds are quite soft and approachable, and sometimes you still get that mineral streak coming through, even in a Cab or a Chardonnay. C gets a special mention in the sources, seems to perform exceptionally well, giving wines with real body, structure, and those lovely peppery, spicy notes.
Okay, let's zoom in a bit, country by country. The sources give a good feel for how distinct things are in each place. Lebanon seems like the most established, the most recognized internationally.
Its modern wine story is quite dramatic. You had the Jesuit influence kicking things off in the 19th century, then growth, then the massive disruption of the Civil War, and now this really determined renaissance driven by better tech and a serious focus on quality.
And the Bekaa Valley is ground zero for Lebanese wine.
It's the engine room, big, fertile valley tucked between two mountain ranges, gets that continental climate but moderated by altitude. Great soils too, clay, limestone. Pretty ideal, really.
And the wines are often blends, international grapes plus their own Obeida and Merwa, styles from big reds to aromatic whites, rosés.
A real range. And you just cannot talk about Lebanese wine without mentioning Chateau Moussard. They're legendary.
Right, the sources really highlight them. They're long-aging reds, blends of Cab, Sinsault, Carillons, and that unique white from Obeida and Merwa.
Totally unique. And their whole approach, minimal intervention, letting the wine do its thing, sometimes embracing that slightly oxidative style. It means the wines develop these incredible, complex, savory, nutty notes over time. They can evolve for decades. It's remarkable.
A real benchmark. But not the only ones doing great things.
No way. The sources also mention other top producers like Chateau Cafraya, Messiah, Domaine des Tourelles, all focused on quality, expressing their specific bit of land.
Okay, moving north, Syria. Obviously a very ancient history. But the recent conflicts,
Yeah,
that's taken a huge toll.
a terrible toll. The sources are clear, vineyard land is down, production is way down, but crucially, they also point to the underlying potential. The unique terroir is still there, some traditional practices survive, local grapes haven't vanished entirely, there's hope for recovery down the line.
Traditional areas were near Damascus, the Barada Valley, and along the coast.
Historically, yes. Today, it's a mix of whatever historic native grapes survive, plus some international ones. It's a place where the ancient past feels very present, just waiting for the chance to properly reemerge.
Israel, on the other hand, sounds like it's had a really dynamic modern revival. History meets high tech.
Very much so. The industry there is really marked by a focus on finding the best vineyard spots, investing in cutting-edge cellars, using precision techniques in the vineyard. It's very quality-driven.
Galilee and the Golan Heights get singled out as top regions.
Yeah, prestigious areas, often high altitude, cooler, volcanic soils in the Golan. The sources say they're great for grapes like Cab, Merlot, Syrah, Chardonnay. That day-night temperature swing, the diurnal range, is key for quality there too.
And even the Negev Desert gets a mention. Talk about challenging conditions.
Extreme challenge. But they're doing it on a smaller scale. Requires smart irrigation, finding grapes that can handle serious heat and dryness. It really showcases their innovation and research. Other spots like Samson, the Judean Hills contribute too.
Grape-wise, lots of international varieties, but also growing interest in their own local or ancient ones.
A real mix. You find powerful reds, crisp whites, rosés, sweet wines, and yeah, a definite trend towards exploring their indigenous heritage. Plus, a big focus on R&D, especially adapting to climate change, water issues, sustainability. That's a major theme for Israel in the sources.
Palestine also has that incredibly long history tied to Christian communities near Bethlehem, Ramallah.
Millennia of history. Today, production is on a smaller scale. You've got dedicated producers really working to keep those ancient traditions alive, but they face serious hurdles. The occupation, access to land, water, it's tough.
They're growing traditional grapes like Baladi, plus some international ones.
That's right. The potential there is really tied to that deep history, the uniqueness of their native grapes, and finding a niche market that values that story of resilience and tradition. Sustainability efforts are part of that too.
And finally, Jordan, described as relatively new, commercially speaking.
Yeah, compared to the others, the commercial industry is younger, but there's growing interest, investment happening, promising areas are starting to emerge, like Mafraq up north, Madaba more central.
Mainly international grapes. For now, Cab, Merlot, Syrah, Chardonnay, but maybe looking at local ones too.
Seems to be the pattern. Tourism and investment are helping drive things forward. The sources suggest Jordan has real potential to carve out its own identity in the coming years.
Wow, so you really have this incredible range across the region. History, geography, grapes, different paths forward. With all that potential in the vineyards, how does it actually get into the bottle? What kind of winemaking are we seeing?
Well, winemaking itself is kind of a mirror of the region. It's this fascinating mix of respecting ancient traditions while fully embracing modern techniques.
So tradition might mean using old-style presses, or maybe cement tanks.
Exactly. Old presses can be super gentle, and cement tanks, especially unlined ones, allow a tiny bit of oxygen exchange microoxygenation, which can help build complexity and texture, particularly in certain styles. We mentioned Musar's whites earlier. That's part of their traditional approach.
But they're definitely using modern tech, too.
Oh, absolutely. Temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks are pretty much essential now, especially for preserving fresh, fruity, aromatic characters in whites. Oak barrels, French, American, different sizes. Toast levels are widely used for adding structure, complexity, those spice or vanilla notes depending on the wine and the goal. And precision farming data feeds back into winery decisions.
The sources mention key steps like maceration for reds, letting the juice sit with the skins.
Right, to get color, tannins, flavor. How long they do that, how intense it is, depends entirely on the grape and the style of red they're aiming for. Fermentation happens in steel, cement, wood. Temperature control is vital there to manage the yeast and keep the flavors clean.
And then aging. Steel for freshness, oak for complexity and longevity.
That's the basic idea. Steel keeps things bright and primary. Oak adds layers, helps soften tannins, and gives the wine potential to develop over time in the bottle. The choice of vessel and how long it stays there really shapes the final wine.
So this whole mix, climate, grapes, techniques, leads to a really broad spectrum of wine styles.
Definitely. For reds, you get everything from those big, powerful, complex wines designed for aging, especially from Lebanon and Israel, right through to lighter, fruitier styles, maybe more typical of Syria or Jordan's emerging scene.
Whites often sound fresh, aromatic, maybe with that mineral edge from altitude or soils.
Particularly from Lebanon and Israel, yeah. Rosés are usually vibrant, fruity, perfect for the climate. Sparkling wine is popping up more too, and don't forget sweet wines, there's a history there, using late harvested or dried grapes. The sources even link it to Commandaria from Cyprus nearby, showing that ancient regional tradition of rich, sweet wines.
Looking forward then, the sources seem pretty optimistic about Levant wine finding its place. A niche market maybe, but growing.
I think so. The unique story is a huge draw. That incredible history, the native grapes, the diverse terroir, the quality that's clearly on the rise. It appeals to people looking for something different, something authentic, something with roots.
And locally, wine is still important culturally, part of life.
Very much so. Part of meals, celebrations, and there's a growing appreciation for quality local wine within the countries themselves, driven by rising incomes and maybe a bit more pride in local products.
Exporting isn't without challenges, though.
No, it's tough out there. Lots of competition. Production volumes are still relatively small compared to the big players. Political instability in some areas doesn't help. And just getting the message out, telling that unique story effectively to the whole world, takes work.
But the opportunities seem pretty compelling, too.
Absolutely. That history, you can't buy that kind of authenticity. The unique grapes offer a real point of difference. The range of styles means there's something for everyone. And globally, people are looking for wines with a real story, real provenance.
Wine tourism, enotourism feels like a really smart way to tap into that.
It's perfect. The scenery is often stunning mountains, valleys, ancient ruins, sometimes right next door to the vines. Visiting the wineries, meeting the families often running them, tasting the wines in context, pairing them with amazing local food. It's a powerful experience, great for the wineries, great for the whole region's image.
And looking really long-term, innovation and sustainability seem key.
Crucial. Research into better techniques, especially for handling things like climate change, managing water efficiently, farming more ecologically, preserving the environment. That's vital for the future.
Plus, continuing to explore those native grapes, figure out their full potential.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance, honoring the incredible tradition while embracing modern methods and meeting the demands of today's wine world. That's how the Levant will keep growing and get the recognition it deserves.
Wow, okay. That really has been quite the journey through these sources, from like the literal dawn of winemaking right up to this really dynamic modern scene.
It's an amazing arc, isn't it? Surviving thousands of years through massive changes, religious restrictions, kept alive by these dedicated communities, and now this vibrant renaissance. Passion, innovation, but still deeply connected to that ancient land.
We covered those incredible deep origins, the proof in the ground, the sheer resilience that kept it going, and then this modern comeback, new people, new money, focusing on native grapes and just sheer quality.
Explored that amazing terroir diversity, the patchwork of climates, soils, landscapes, creating all these unique spots, and the grapes themselves, the ancient ones like Obade and Merwa, alongside the familiar international names.
And we got that snapshot across the different countries, Lebanon's established players and icons like Musar, Syria's potential waiting to rebound, Israel's high-tech revival, Palestine's deep roots and current struggles, and Jordan's up-and-coming scene.
And how they're using a mix of old and new methods in the winery to capture all that potential, making everything from powerful reds to these really aromatic mineral whites.
It genuinely feels like a region with just unparalleled history, but also a really exciting future in wine.
And honestly, we hope listening to this makes you want to go out and find some of these wines, taste that history, that unique place, that modern energy for yourself.
It really does leave you with a pretty powerful thought, doesn't it? I mean, what does it actually mean to sip a wine that comes from the very place, the actual soil, where winemaking might have first begun? How does knowing that story maybe change how you experience the wine in your glass?
It adds something profound, I think. A connection, a sense of depth you don't get just anywhere.
A really profound thought. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you. Until next time.